Okay, so I'm going to build a little bit on what Tim said, and obviously from what we're doing in the New Zealand perspective. So I'm talking today on, I've tweaked the title, added a few more words because it's a bit broader than we were thinking, but looking at Eucalypt health here in New Zealand, and our focus is on our research program here, and I'll be talking a little bit about the program as an overall, and also I'll throw in some of our current PhD students' program and results. And that little beetle up there is Process cryptus, which most of you I'm sure have heard of by now. So the threats to eucalypts in New Zealand, eucalypt health in New Zealand, are obviously both abiotic and biotic. I deal with the biotic side of things, and some other members of our team obviously are dealing with more of the abiotic types of things like frost tolerance, drought tolerance, and of course there'll be an interaction between these as well. I'm only really going to talk about insects. We'll deal with disease when we have to. We will have to probably at some point, but I'll just talk about insects today. So any of these threats to eucalypt health, the consequences are of course that they could cause mortality, limited productivity, reduced wood quality and or quantity. And I put the last one in their interaction with heartwood properties as well. So we still, as we go through our program, hopefully we will start working on, are there actually any interactions between defoliation and how that actually affects the wood formation as well. So that's a few years down the track yet. NZDFI's take on eucalypt health, we have a real intention of future-proofing this industry, making sure that we actually are aware of what the threats are, the pests, and potentially pathogens, and mitigating and reducing those risks. So avoiding any unnecessary risks, really. We want to be able to minimise the impacts of any pests that are already here or that will get here in the future, and that's going to come down to selecting for the most tolerant species we can find, or genetic families we can find. And obviously optimising tree vigour, so that's the whole site species matching that's been mentioned multiple times already this morning. Putting the right tree in the right place produces a healthier tree, and that's less likely to be attacked by any of the insects or any of the pathogens. And if it is attacked, it's more likely to withstand that attack. We're also, the second part of our program is looking at improving kind of a sustainable management. We're not going to be able to get rid of all the pests, we are going to have to manage some of them at times. So understanding how to basically implement something similar to what they're doing in Tasmania, where they have a good IPM program. They know their threshold levels for how many eggs of one particular or a group of beetles they have to see before they expect that they're actually going to have to implement some kind of management. There's no point in going out every single year and spraying because you think something's going to have an impact. We want to know what actually is going to have an impact, and only control them when we need to. So I just want to, Tim already said this of course, but I just want to reiterate that pests are inevitable. We will get pests from Australia ongoing because it's right next door. We have already got, this is a rough count, at least 63 odd eucalypt feeding insects in New Zealand. About 30 of those are specialists, and it's the specialists that we're concerned about because they're the ones that actually can potentially cause damage. The others kind of will feed on other things as well. Only about a third of those species will ever require any control, and in most cases it's only one or two species that people really control for in other plantations, and other species like nitins and so forth. So this graph is pulled out of Tony Withers' paper from, I think it was 2001, showing the increasing, the cumulative number of insects coming into the country, of course from Australia, because that's where eucalypt insects come from. And she showed, scarily I guess, is this little line here. This is the specialists, this is the ones that can become pests. It used to be that we got about one new specialist every 7 years. Over time, this has now changed to one new specialist species about every 17 months. So there's an increased rate of pests been coming into the country since about 1980. And as Tim said, that's because we've got bad neighbours. For natural reasons and from human-assisted reasons. So we've got a lot more trade and travel going on. We're all popping over between New Zealand and Australia all the time. That just increases the risks of accidental introduction through human mediation. Then, of course, there's the natural risk, and I've just thrown in this 1978 paper because it's got the map and it's a really nice example I always use. But there's really good evidence that shows that wind currents coming across Australia are quite capable of bringing insects and pathogens through the airstream and dumping them out in New Zealand. It doesn't happen every day, of course, but there are certain wind patterns that will come over and potentially drop this load of very small organisms and fungal spores and so forth in the country. We can't do anything about that. That's just something we have to deal with. And the one at the top here, this is a blue moon butterfly. I can't say I've ever seen one, but apparently they come over reasonably regularly and are found in the Nelson kind of region. Yeah. They don't breed successfully here, unfortunately, because they're quite pretty. Otherwise we'd keep them. When they do get here, of course, these pests find a relatively similar same seasons, not too different a climate if they're coming from the eastern parts here. And of course we're planting all these lovely eucalypts for them to feed on, so when they get here there's plenty of stuff to eat if they land in the right spot, and there's not many natural predators and parasitoids in those eucalypts to kill them off, so they do quite well. Sorry, it's my button. Where is it? So pests are inevitable, but I would say pest impact isn't inevitable. We can do stuff about it. All crop species, when we grow crops of any type, whether it's a tree or a cabbage, they're subject to pests of some sort. And of course, I'll throw in examples for radiata pine. There's at least something like 450 odd insects that feed on pinus in the world. About 147 of those have or are in New Zealand, and about 40 of them can feed on radiata pine. But we don't actually have many insect pests feeding on radiata pine that are a problem. Most of the problems with radiata pine are pathogens in New Zealand. This one up here is actually a combination of pathogens and insects. On closer inspection, I thought I'll go and test my mycologist skills and figure out what this pathogen is on my dad's tree. It's not actually a radiata. And of course I went out there and the first thing I found was an insect, which is good. So it's actually a combination of, I think it's cycloneusma and aphid. I really like this old quote too from a Canadian biologist that was actually brought over to assess the New Zealand Forest Health Program back in the 50s, and he at the time said basically growing radiata pine was daft. There was so many pests and pathogens that were going to destroy the plantations that it was paramount to challenging the laws of nature. Obviously that didn't play out, and a lot of that has been put down to the fact that they are intensively managed. And they're a long way from most of the pests and pathogens. One of the key examples from that time, of course, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Sirex wood wasp, this wasp here that bores into the stems of pine. They were reasonably problematic sometimes in the earlier days, and this is just records from forest health surveillance. And all you really need to note is that the orange line here, severe damage, that over time, as we've learnt to manage those plantations very well and put them in the right places, the severe damage from that wasp has gone down to completely insignificant. So no one really has damage with Sirex wood wasp in New Zealand anymore. So a combination of the correct site matching, the correct stand management, and biocontrol agents as well. So I'd like to think, just as Luis was saying this morning, you know, he's comparing 70 years of breeding pine, and we get to these lovely trees. Well, if we think for the insects as well, over time we will get on top of some of these issues that we have now, and we'll be able to hopefully get any problems we have now down to these really low levels and actually mitigate any future ones that come up at the same time. So what are our threats to eucalypts in New Zealand? The most important ones, of course, are the leaf beetles, Chrysomela beetles, Propsis beetles, whatever you want to call them. I'll probably accidentally call them propsines all the time, so this is what I'm talking about if I say that word. They're the most damaging eucalypt defoliators here in New Zealand as well as Australia, and we have a nice suite of species. Unfortunately, most of there's actually something like 400 of these things over in Australia, and some of them are very beautiful we've got more of the dull, boring ones for some reason. So you could send us next time maybe some of the prettier ones, that would be nice. Propsis charybdis has been here since 1916, and you can see another couple of Trachymelas in 76-92. Recently, two new ones, Propsis sterna beata and varicolis just last year, and a number of others intercepted over time which haven't managed to establish. So as I said, over 400 odd species of these types of beetles in Australia. Can we manage that risk? And some people say, why are you growing eucalypts when you've got all these bugs just waiting basically to come across the Tasman? If you look at Propsis charybdis early on when it first arrived, well not quite when it first arrived, but when we first started developing eucalyptus plantations in New Zealand, they really hammered them, and it really stopped the early implementation of those plantations. Over time, we still have a eucalypt. We still have eucalypt plantations in New Zealand, so obviously we've got them under some form of control. We have introduced biocontrol agents, and obviously growing Eucalyptus nitens in some parts of the countries and not other parts of the country has meant that we can actually grow them in the presence of this pest. So if you go down to Southland, there's not as many of these Propsis beetles as if you go to the Central North Island. And you do still get outbreaks in some parts of the country. You get this broom topping effect with all the top foliage taken out, and you can get pretty severe defoliation. But that doesn't actually happen all the time, and it certainly doesn't happen everywhere. And there's a little parasitoid wasp, which is one of the species helping to control populations there. These are the eggs of the beetle, and she lays her egg in there and stops the egg developing so that her offspring can develop. So that's Propsis charybdis, but there's other propsine beetles, as I said, and these two here, Trachymela species. This one came into Auckland, I think it was in about 1976, and it has never really got down into the South Island and caused any major damage. I don't know why that red dot is there actually. It sometimes pops up here, but most of the time you see it, it'll be in those drier Hawke's Bay regions. So it could be an issue for us, something to keep an eye on. But it has been here since the 70s, and it hasn't spread throughout the whole country, and it's not really up there as one of the things that most people worry about. This one here, Catenata, arrived even earlier, I think it was, 92? Oh, later, 92, sorry, and you'll be hard pressed to find that. So it is a propsine beetle, but it obviously has different biology, different ecology, different requirements, whether it's climatic or very specific food preferences or just its reproductive biology. It's never really spread out of this area. So, you know, if we're really lucky, some of these new pests that we're getting will be like that and not spread too far, although the ones that we've got at the moment just recently come in looking a little bit nastier than that one. So what we want to be able to do is have a suite of dryland eucalypt species that can thrive in the presence of these established pests that we already have and the future ones that we will undoubtedly get. The established pests that we already have now, as Tim was saying, they're not going to always act the same in the future. If they're found in different parts of the country in the future, they might respond differently. If we provide them a whole different suite of eucalypts to feed on, they might respond differently to that food source. It might be better for them, they might be able to reproduce more quickly, or it might not. When it comes to future pests, well, we don't even know what they're going to be. It might be something like the autumn gum moth. This is the caterpillars of the same species Tim mentioned before. That's something on our radar. Obviously, it's a known pest, we don't want it, but it's just as likely to be something we've never heard of. There's a number of eucalypt feeding insects in New Zealand that weren't known until they started feeding in New Zealand. They must be from Australia, but they weren't found in Australia, or some of them haven't been found in Australia yet, I don't think. So it's not necessarily the ones you're expecting that will arrive. So what we need to do is find methods of mitigating these risks, and if we want to use methods to control these pests or deal with these pests, they need to be effective, feasible, environmentally favourable, and socially acceptable as well. There's no point in us growing this lovely ground durable timber that doesn't need to be treated with chemicals and then go out and spray the entire plantation with other chemicals so that we can produce them. And I did steal those 4 bullet points from Tim and Jane Ellick's paper. So the program that we're looking at has two main aspects. The first is reducing risks through screening for pest tolerance. There's not much information already on how insects interact with the species of eucalypts that we're looking at, because they haven't been grown commercially much, or if at all, before. The only few examples I could find, Argifloea is known to be a poor host for a common eucalypt pest in Australia, Propsis atamaria. That's a good thing. And Eucalyptus tricarpa has been studied in a small degree looking at the chemical composition of the leaves, and it has a particular group of secondary plant metabolites called sideroxenols, which are highly variable within the species, and they're also found to be highly heritable, so that variation is heritable. And that's a good thing, because that's the kind of chemical that can confer pest tolerance. So if we can find the individuals that have those high levels of sideroxenols in them, then hopefully we can select those and breed from those to get more tolerant trees. So for example, this is just looking at Bossestuana at one of the aviary sites, and we want to know things like, why is this tree looking really, really lush, and this tree a few metres away has been absolutely hammered by gum emperor moth. Then we've got these other ones, another tree further down, it's being affected by a leaf rolling caterpillar. Different tree further down, it's not being affected by the leaf rolling caterpillar, but it is being defoliated in another way by a blister sawfly. And here we've got typical Propsis charybdis damage. So you're not getting all the same insects on all the same trees, you're not getting all the same insects on the ages of trees, and you're not getting all the same insects in each site. It's quite variable, and we need to understand that more in our regional New Zealand context. So the basis for selecting for tolerance is revolves around the fact that eucalypts are highly variable in their own characteristics and how that interacts with the pests that eat them, or the insects that eat them. So they vary in their nutritional content. It's actually, eucalypt is a really bad food. It's very low in nitrogen, and the nitrogen's actually hard to extract for the insect. They're physically difficult to eat, to both in terms of getting your jaws through them and actually digesting them. And they have a huge range of secondary chemicals which can have toxic effects on the insects. So all that variation is actually really useful for us to be able to actually find which combination of those different things, can confer the most tolerance to the insect pests we have here. And the eucalypts also vary in space and time as a result of, a lot of it is a result of the variation in the food that's available to them. They have really strong preferences for what food they actually like. If you try feeding a Propsis beetle, you feed it in a cage on one tree species for a few weeks because you're doing some research on it, and then you run out of that tree and you have to go and find some foliage from somewhere else, they'll just turn up their noses until they get really hungry. So they're quite picky. The composition of the food availability is also important. If you have species A and B side by side, they might really like species A and ignore species B. And if you've got species C there, then suddenly they actually prefer species B and ignore species A or whatever. So, and they also interact with the environment. So it's quite a messy. It's quite a lot to untangle. So what we want to do with pest tolerance is assess the variation in some of these characteristics and identify those breeds of trees which, in addition with the breeding for wood properties and good growth and form and all the rest of it, and I think Louise's scatter graph with all adding the different characteristics was a really good one. So we're choosing for growth and form and wood properties, and we're throwing in insect defoliation in there as well. So we need all of those things at the same time. So in general, we're going to be looking at tolerance across the board. So as I said, we don't know what the next Eucalypt pest will be. So we might as well just go for general tolerance to defoliators rather than getting too specific. So we've already started this program. We're just in the early stages of it, but we have started screening one species to determine which individual families of trees are more or less tolerant to insect defoliation. And eventually we will get on to rolling that out across other species and across other sites, as many sites as possible, and use that to help inform our selections. Several years down the track, of course, we will also go back to those trees that we're screening now, which again are very young, and screen them as older trees and find out if what we actually predicted from those young trees flows through onto how they're affected as older trees. And it'll be interesting to see what that shows, because as Tim was alluding to, the pests that are affecting the younger trees are not necessarily still affecting them when they're further down through the rotation. And it might be that those older trees are either not affected by pests, or maybe they're affected by a different suite of pests. So it'll be quite interesting to see how that plays out. And the last bit there, repeating screening of our initial material. That's kind of what I already covered. Sorry. I should either read that or talk, not both. So we have seen natural variation in the Bossestoana that we've been looking at already, and PhD student of mine, Hui Min Lin, has been out there for a couple of years, monitoring things every few weeks, assessing pest load as well as impact on stem diameter. She's actually presenting in Wellington at the Entomological Society conference this morning, which is why she's not here. But she's gone through 200 Bossestoana trees, about 15 families, different families, and she's used 2 different assessment methods to try and assess damage and pest load on those eucalypts. So she's looking for 4 species. That's the wee leaf roller, that's the blister sawfly, the gum emperor moth, which is actually really bad in her site. You can see, oops, go back. That's forward. You can actually see the pupae just there. So I know that was done by gum emperor moth because there's a pupae at the top. And of course the Peropsis charybdis, and it's the 4th instar larvae that actually does a fair amount of the damage. So she's been assessing those, and I'm not going to go into the details of results and so forth yet, but she has definitely been able to see that there are differences between some families. Some have small amounts of damage, and other families of trees have large amounts of damage, and obviously we'd be quite keen to go and have a wee check and see exactly which families those ones are, and then find out if we're really lucky, they'll be the same families that have good wood properties and growing properties too. Another thing that would be quite nice to do as a next step to this is also linking those rankings that she's getting for the amount of insect damage to any chemical traits, so the wood property traits, but also foliar traits and the chemicals, and that might be one way to help us have a much quicker tool that we can go through and actually assess more trees more easily. Instead of counting bugs all the time, can we look at chemical composition using something like NIR, the same as Clemens was saying, have we got a more rapid assessment? I better get going. So specific tolerance, there are occasions where we might want to look more specifically at a particular pest, and you might have heard of the Eucalypt variegated beetle. We have briefly been up to have a look at it and see what it is eating up in the Hawke's Bay, and all I can really tell you is that it has nibbled everything. But the level of defoliation varied from basically just a few percent through to about 60%. There was nothing that was completely defoliated. But the damage was highly variable between and within sites. So that's actually really good, because that gives us something to select upon. And the picture here is just, we actually also found parasitoids attacking the eggs, which is another good thing. That's a parasitoid that was already here. This just shows very briefly her the amount of defoliation that she found for different species. and the proportion of attacked trees that suffered that each different level of defoliation. And all I really want you to see, other than the spelling mistakes, is that there is variation. So here's a good example. Here you've got some trees with less than 5%, some with light damage, and a few with a much heavier damage. So what is it about the ones with light damage or no damage, and how can we select for those? Pest monitoring and management, we want to understand the link between defoliation and impact, and also between number of eggs in the early stages and the number of, and how that links to defoliation and impact as well. And that's what's going to lead us into being able to do something like what Forestry Tasmania has done, and set up an integrated pest management program. So no, if we go out and we count 3 eggs on a shoot, then it's time to consider some kind of management action, or it's not important. So I'll just give you some quick examples of how Hui Min has been working on this. She's done defoliation trials where we've literally all gone out and cut leaves off trees to try and work out whether these eucalypts can actually tolerate quite a lot of defoliation and need to be protected at all. Removing 50 or 90% of the leaves in summer or late summer, or both. And here's just an example of those 2 types of defoliation. And you might think that's quite a lot, but this is natural defoliation on a tree next door, so this does actually happen in a bad year. Just very briefly, she has found defoliation, as you'd expect, slows down growth. So here you've got defoliation occurred here. Control is no defoliation, carries on trending up. Moderate defoliation is stem diameter is a bit lower, and severe defoliation stem diameter is a bit lower again. So obviously the more severely you defoliate them, the higher the reduction in growth. And similar findings in late summer. Here's the defoliation event here, and controls keep growing, and the severe and moderate slow off a bit. What we're really interested in is what happens when you hammer them twice, because that often happens with the life cycle of these insects. They have 2 generations. So just when your tree starts to recover, all this nice new foliage, the insects hit their 2nd generation and actually start defoliating that as well. So we did double defoliations in spring and then in late summer, and you can see that the red lines there was no chance basically for those trees to recover. And what we're really interested in with all these studies is actually following these over time. So she's only had a chance to do 2 years so far, but we want to know, and if I just show you the next slide I can show it a bit more clearly, we want to know when, or if, and when these lines actually catch up to the control. Is the tree going to upregulate its photosynthesis to actually to recover? Because this has been seen in other situations. And whether, if you're only suffering from moderate defoliation, will that tree actually eventually catch up and recover, even if you don't do anything about the pests? I think I'm running out of time, which is why I'm rushing, sorry. This one is just showing about severity and frequency again. So we've got moderate defoliation and severe defoliation, and again you've got the spring only defoliation. The line eventually starts trending up. It's still lower than no defoliation, but you can see the additional defoliation in spring means that recovery never happens. So those are some of the aspects of the program that we've already started on, and some of the directions that we're going with the program to try and basically reduce those risks which are not going to go away. We can only deal with them as they arise. There will be lots of new associations to be formed. We're putting in a whole bunch of new species. Therefore, we don't actually know how the insects that we already have in New Zealand are going to respond to those, or how new insects that get here will respond to them. So there's quite a lot of work to be done there, but hopefully we can pull all those strands together and, as I said, reduce those risks.